What are the chances of an apocalyptic super-eruption during your lifetime? Chances are you'll die from something else first. But researchers just published the first ever map of active supervolcanoes on Earth, which means that it's time to answer one of humanity's most important questions. Where should we not build cities? Supervolcanoes are volcanic complexes that have the potential to cause mass extinction events, and there are 7 that scientists have identified as being potentially active. A super-eruption would spew huge amounts of gas, ash, and debris into the atmosphere, causing global climate disruption and crop failures. They might also release mercury, which can negatively affect the development of the nervous system. And while we often think of volcanoes as belching out lava, the magma that makes up this lava is actually a mix of molten rock, dissolved gases, and tiny crystals. It's called magma because it's still below the Earth's surface, and lava once it hits the surface. What all of these components have in common is that they are made mostly of silicate minerals, which are really good at trapping carbon dioxide. Magma chambers can trap so much CO2 that the pressure inside them is hundreds of times higher than the surrounding solid rock. This pressure keeps the magma buoyant and allows it to slowly work its way toward Earth's surface without getting pushed aside by the solid rock around it. That is, until eventually it reaches a critical threshold. At that point, the gases in the magma start to form bubbles, and the pressure drops, allowing the surrounding rock to collapse and triggering an eruption. When you hear about a volcanic eruption, you're hearing about the explosion caused by the sudden release of this pressure. The more CO2 in the magma chamber, the bigger the bubble, the faster it expands, and the more violent the eruption. And if you can imagine how much CO2 is in the entire magma chamber, well, that's a lot of greenhouse gas that could be released into the atmosphere in one go, so you can see why scientists are eager to understand them better. But the problem is that, unlike regular volcanoes, supervolcanoes don't look very dangerous. They're usually found in remote locations, and their magma chambers are hidden deep beneath the ground. Scientists use satellite data to measure changes in the land surface over time, and when they do this, they can detect features that are consistent with a magma chamber underneath, like subtle shifts in elevation. But even this technology isn't enough to confirm whether or not a volcano is currently active. We only know about 3 or 4 eruptions that have happened in the past 10,000 years, so it's hard to tell what qualifies as active. For this new study, published today in the journal Science Advances, researchers took a closer look at several known supervolcanoes using seismic records, which measure the strength and timing of earthquakes that happen in different layers of the Earth. To locate active supervolcanoes, the team looked for magma chambers that were filled with liquid magma and had been recently replenished. They then plotted these active supervolcanoes on a map to reveal where you should not build your dream home. There are 7 potential supervolcanoes worldwide that could pose an existential threat to humanity. 4 of them were already known: Yellowstone in the northwest corner of the United States, Toba in Indonesia, Valles Caldera in New Mexico, and Long Valley Caldera, also in California. But 3 were newly identified in this study: Cerro Galán in Argentina, Huayna Putina in Peru, and Manun in Cameroon. These 3 have the potential to dump 2,900 cubic kilometers of material, or 700 billion barrels of oil worth of material, onto the Earth's surface. If this happens, it could bury huge areas of South America and Central Africa under layers of ash. But it doesn't mean that they're all set to erupt any day now. Their average eruption interval is about 30,000 years, so we're probably safe there. The thing is, they tend to get more active as they get older, and it seems like some of them are entering their active phase right now. Take, for example, Cerro Galán, the youngest of the 7 supervolcanoes. It first formed about 1 million years ago and has been dormant ever since until now. In the past 3,000 years, it has experienced a 100-fold increase in earthquake activity, indicating that it's starting to stir from its slumber. While the other volcanoes on this list haven't shown an uptick in activity, they have erupted within the last 10,000 years, which puts them in the active category. Yellowstone, for example, has been the source of two recent caldera-forming eruptions, meaning it has the potential to blow again very soon on the geologic timescale. There's a magma chamber beneath Yellowstone that is continually feeding the three active geysers in the area. One of these geysers is Old Faithful, which erupts every 60 to 120 minutes. Every time it does, some of the magma chamber gets emptied out. Researchers recently analyzed samples from this magma chamber and determined that it's less dense than previously thought, which suggests that it's less viscous or runny. This means that it will empty out more quickly, making a super eruption more likely. So should we panic? Well, let's think about this logically. First of all, volcanoes are awesome. If you want to live somewhere that has consistently nice weather, plenty of sunshine and an abundance of fresh water, a volcano is the place to be. Just ask the people who live on the sunny slopes of Mount Vesuvius, the volcano that buried the Roman city of Pompeii in 79 AD. After it erupted again in 1631, locals started building their homes on the volcano. Volcanoes also make great natural barriers. They're typically tall and narrow, so they block wind and create sheltered areas. On top of that, they tend to be rich in nutrients, which makes them perfect for growing food. Finally, they're full of free energy. Some places harness the heat from volcanoes to produce electricity. Others use them to warm buildings and greenhouses or warm pools. And who doesn't love a hot tub? All that being said, maybe don't build your house directly atop an active magma chamber. A 2018 study found that people tend to forget about the risk of volcanic eruptions and underestimate how quickly an eruption could happen. In surveys, people rated the likelihood of a super eruption during their lifetime as anywhere between 1% and 10%. But according to researchers, the odds are much higher. They found that the average time between eruptions of a magma chamber is 10 times shorter than the age of the magma chamber itself. Take Yellowstone again as an example. It first formed 640,000 years ago and had its first caldera-forming eruption after about 200,000 years. The second caldera-forming eruption happened after another 200,000 years. But if we extrapolate from this model, we would expect the next one to happen in only 20,000 years. Granted, this is just a model, and it may not reflect reality, but it does show that these events can happen much sooner than we think. Based on these predictions, researchers estimate that there is a 1 in 27 chance of a super eruption in any given year, which is definitely high enough to put some money aside for disaster preparedness. Of course, the actual risk varies depending on where you live. If you live near one of these volcanoes, your risk is higher. About 20% of the world's population lives near one of the 7 volcanoes identified in this study. And if you live near Yellowstone, you have a 1 in 2,500 chance of experiencing a super eruption in your lifetime. Of course, even though you might be able to predict where and when an eruption will occur, predicting the details of the eruption itself is impossible. In 1980, Mount St. Helens in Washington erupted, killing 57 people and releasing 1.2 cubic kilometers of material. At the time, it was the deadliest eruption in U.S. history. It was so catastrophic that scientists have been using it as a case study ever since. And yet even after all that research, scientists didn't notice that similar signs were happening in Unzen in Japan before its deadly 2021 eruption. So we are still missing some key information about what exactly causes these eruptions. In the meantime, our best bet is to keep monitoring the ones we know about and trying to understand them better. Thanks to these studies, we now know that it takes 5,000 years for the magma chambers to replenish themselves after an eruption. We also know that increased seismic activity might be a warning sign that something big is coming. The fact that there are still so many unknowns about these volcanoes highlights how little we understand about our planet. There's still so much to discover. So the next time you get a free moment, maybe you should watch this video or this one. Don't worry, you'll learn something cool from both of them.